kids, I'm Sarah at the Swanee branch, and today we're going to learn about nature's recycling system, also known as composting. It's an amazingly complex process that's amazingly simple for us humans to take advantage of. But before we dig down into the nitty-gritty of how it works, let's go for a field trip to the forest. Why the forest? Well, that's where we can see nature doing its recycling all by itself. Come on, let's take a look. Okay, so here we are in the woods, and I found this great log that's a perfect example of nature's recycling system. You can see it's already covered with moss, and it's really fallen apart. And in some places it looks more like dirt than wood. And so we're going to take a closer look and dig around in it a little bit and see what we can find that's making it look like that. Why is it turning from a log into dirt? So let's take a closer look here. Okay, so what we have here, take a look here. See, there's leaves and stuff all in there. And this is hard like wood, but it's getting softer. Look at that. I can just move it with my shovel. You see these tiny little white lines along here, this kind of a network? That's called mycelium. That's a fungus. It's the roots of mushrooms. And let's see what else we can see in here. Maybe we'll find some other critters that are, oh, look at this. You see this little creepy crawly? I don't know what he is, but he's eating that wood and making it into smaller pieces. So all those decomposers, the fungi, the plants, the little bugs, they're all going to work, and eventually they're going to turn this log into, you guessed it, dirt. But it's not just any dirt. This is really rich soil that's full of nutrients for making it easier for new plants to grow. Why do you think this moss is having such an easy time of it on here? It's all good and nutritious stuff for it. So we found some cool stuff in that log, didn't we? Now let's go back to the library and see what we can find out about why people would want to make compost and how to get started. Let's go. Here's the scoop. Just like recycling helps people to keep some of the metal and paper and plastics out of the landfills, composting helps us to keep some of the organic waste out of the landfills. Organic waste is simply things like food scraps, trimmings from the yard, branches, whatever. But we want to keep that out of the landfills too, because that moist, rotting organic waste can mix with the chemicals of the other stuff that we put in there, and it makes this really nasty chemical soup that seeps down into the soil and into the water from the landfill. But it gets better than that. It's not just keeping stuff out of the landfill. Remember I showed you that shovel full of dirt that was made by nature's recycling system? Well, when we compost, we're doing the same thing. We're making new soil, and that soil can be really useful for lots of different things. You can mix it in with the soil of your vegetable gardens, your flower gardens, and it enriches it, and it softens the soil up, which is really important here in Georgia, where the soil tends to be really hard and not very good for growing things. You can also spread it all over your lawn, and it seeps down under the grass and nourishes the grass and makes the lawn better. You can put it around your garden plants or around your trees and shrubs to help keep them moist in a dry summer. You can even spread it on a bare spot to help reduce erosion. But you know what? Even if you don't use it yourself, just making the compost is giving organic waste back to nature in a way that nature can use all by itself. So now that we've found out some good reasons to make compost, let's dig a little deeper. I think it's fun to find out what words really mean. So we're going to go talk to my friend Professor Profundus to learn more about the word compost. Hello, I'm Professor Profundus, and we're going to talk about compost. Compost comes from the two Latin words com, meaning with or together, and positus, meaning put or placed. So you put them together and you have things put together. That's compost. Thank you. Thanks, Professor Profundus. That seems easy enough, right? But what things do we need to put together to make compost? Here's the list. The two biggest contributors are green things that are high in nitrogen and brown things that are dry and high in carbon. So if you take your greens and your browns, you add a little air and water and sunshine and decomposers, you give it a little time, your compost turns into soil. Wait a minute. Rewind. Woo! What are decomposers? I'm so glad you asked, because we get to dissect another word with Professor Profundus. Hello again. Decompose comes from combining the Latin prefix de with the word compose. Now, does that sound a little familiar, that word compose? It should, because it comes from the same root as compost. And what does that mean? That's right, things that have been put together. So if decomposing is the opposite of putting things together, then decomposers must be things that take other things apart. Specifically, decomposers are living things that take dead things apart. Thank you. Thank you, Professor Profundus. Sounds kind of gross though, doesn't it? But those decomposers are doing a really important job. Could you imagine, if all of the dead plants and animals did not decompose? Ooh. So let's check out some of these decomposers. You've got your bacteria, you've got all kinds of fungi, large and small. You've got worms, you've got things like millipedes and beetles and ants and all kinds of little critters that are going to work in your compost, helping to turn it into soil.
Let's see what else we need to actually start composting. You can buy or build a more complicated composting system, and you can even buy or make a worm composting system that stays inside. And in the comments below, I've linked to some websites that give instructions on how to do that. But today, we're going to keep it simple and focus on starting a basic compost heap. You really only need 3 things. 1, a container to collect kitchen scraps. Make sure it has a lid. You can buy a fancy one with filters or simply use an old plastic container. 2, a place to put your greens and browns outside where decomposers can get to them. This can be bare soil in an out-of-the-way corner of your yard, or you can build a simple enclosure cheaply with chicken wire or discarded wooden pallets. Wherever you put it, you want your heap to get some sun and rain, and you want it to be easy to get to, but you also want it out of the way, since it ain't too party. 3, a shovel or gardening fork to mix things up. If you use those for turning the compost, that will aerate the compost. That is, it will mix in air to help it decompose more quickly. But if you aren't planning to actively use the compost in gardening, you can also just pile it and let it do its thing. Even then, you need to have a shovel handy in case you add an extra stinky batch of greens. Covering that up with a few shovelfuls of dirt will help keep the smell down. To give you an idea of how simple it can be, I'd like to introduce you to one of my coworkers, another Sarah, at the Decula branch. She has started a compost heap right there at the library. Hi, Sarah. What can you tell us about your compost heap?
Hello, I'm Sarah. I'm from the Decula branch, and I'm going to show you my little compost heap. Compost heaps can be made anywhere. I have a little corner here and a bit of space, so I've got mine here. But you can do it behind a bush, or behind some trees, or down the bottom of your garden, wherever is convenient. There's lots of literature and books and classes that you can do on composting, and there's lots of equipment you can buy to help you have a more efficient compost process. When all's said and done, the best piece of equipment you can have is a garden fork. And what you're going to do is you're going to turn your compost to aerate it. Now in my compost heap, I have garden scraps, I have vegetables from the kitchen table, and I've got some cardboard because cardboard will biodecompose, it'll biodegrade. And this is how you turn a compost heap. the more you turn, the quicker it'll decompose. You can already see that some of the stuff that I put in there is breaking down and making lovely rich.
Thanks, Sarah. That is starting to look like lovely rich soil. So now let's put it all together and get started on making our own compost. Here's what we need to do. The first thing we'll need to do is to get the spot ready. As I mentioned earlier, this can be as simple or complex as you want it to be. At the very least, you'll need to clear any weeds from the place you'll use to build your compost heap. It's also a good idea to use a shovel to turn over the soil there. This will loosen it up and expose more decomposers in the soil to your greens and browns. If you want to build an enclosure for your compost, it's best to leave one side either completely open or easily removable to make it easier to shovel or turn over the compost. Once you've collected a container full of kitchen scraps, you can dump it right on the ground there. Ideally, you'd also add some browns, such as more soil or a layer of dried leaves on top of the fresh greens. Adding the browns will help keep the pile from stinking, reduce the number of unwanted animals it attracts, and help the decomposition work faster. Though, if you don't have any handy or don't have time, it's okay to skip this step. After that, you just keep adding layers of greens and browns and let all those decomposers go to work. The only other steps are occasionally turning and watering your compost. Here are some examples of compost heaps, both simple and complex. Doesn't that handful of finished compost make you want to plant something? It sure makes me want to. And this whole compost thing sounds so easy, maybe even I can do it. Do you think I can? Well, I'm going to go home and give it a try. Stop by the Swanee branch sometime and ask me how it's going. You can also come by to explore what the library has to offer for more information about composting. Here are a few of the books for children and adults we have available now. And our digital resources, Britannica and Explora, also offer quite a few articles on the subject. Don't forget, we've also provided a link to some online resources and local organizations that may be helpful. Thanks for joining me today, and I'll see you soon at Swanee. In the meantime, let's start digging.